in the beginning, in the morning, in the presentation of Professor Christopher Clark, that there is no black and white story. And I would say for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or for the Habsburg Empire, that there is no one story about what happened during the First World War. But there had been a lot of national narratives developed after 1918. And what I think we should talk about is, had there been not a national history, a national story, but had there been common patterns about some topics. And my topic is denunciation. And to stick to the time, I will read, so it's much easier for me not to, to need more minutes. And the historiography on denunciation, I think it's much better. Do you hear me? It was better before, okay. So it's, yeah, okay. The historiography on denunciation in the Habsburg Empire during World War I is rare, although many historians worked with this phenomenon, which usually increases in times of crisis and war, as well as under authoritarian regimes. Nevertheless, I can refer to the works of two Habsburg historians who already dealt with this subject during World War I. Maureen Healy deals with, in one subchapter of her book, Vienna and the Fall of the Habsburg Empire, with denunciation. She draws a picture of wartime Vienna, which was mainly influenced by food shortage and a lack of information. Both created perfect circumstances for denunciation. Healy described denunciation together with rumors and censorship as, I quote, crisis of truth at the home front. A similar work was done by Martin Moll for the Styrian case. On the other hand, Nancy Wingfield is dealing with denunciation in her article about prostitution in wartime Austria. She points on a certain aspect of the content of the denunciation letters, alleged female misbehavior like secret prostitution. The letters show that not only Habsburg Germans accused non-Germans, which very often happened in Healy's examples, but denunciations reflected regional national struggles. Healy called the situation created by the denunciation as the breakdown of community. I would say that these accusations were not only influenced by the wartime situation, like shortage of food and knowledge, but in the same way influenced by pre-war animosities and prejudices. Healy points on this fact when arguing that most denunciations in Vienna were directed from so-called German writers on Czechs and Jews, members of Viennese society whose relationship was already troublesome before the outbreak of the First World War. But animosities were not only the result of ethnic belonging. Very often the motivation behind the denunciation was personal hatred, revenge, and a feeling of injustice, directed to neighbors, colleagues, or even family members. In most cases, it was a mixture of these two, and ethnicity was only put in front to hide the real cause. And ethnicity played a role in almost all cases. Beside common features of denunciation, the Austro-Hungarian example therefore opens the floor for particularities due to the state structure and the multi-ethnic composition. And I think when our conference is based in Zagreb, the Croat case is a very interesting case, because the Croats during the First World War experienced two different law regimes. The one group belonged to the Hungarian Empire and the other one to the Austrian. And if we are dealing with denunciation, it's very much influenced by the emergency laws and therefore in Hungary and in Austria there had been different emergency laws. The Habsburg Empire was before 1914 also being far away from being a centralistic state or entity. Therefore, the denunciation cases reflect the communication problem between lower administrative units, for example, police and communities and towns, with the ministries and the war surveillance office based in Vienna. These peculiarities created a special kind of home fronts war. Denunciation certainly helped to worsen living conditions. It has therefore also been asked for the reaction of the state institutions, especially when the accusations were proved to be without any evidence. When planning for the state of emergency, the army and civil ministries saw presumptive threats, so before 1914, in socialists and communists, and some ethnic groups like Czechs, Serbs, or Italians. These internal enemies were added citizens of the enemy states during war, as well as the South Slav propagandists. On the other, although they called it the South-Slav propagandists. On the other hand, there had been the so-called loyal ethnicities like Germans, but also Hungarians, Bosnian Muslims, and Poles. Therefore, we have to ask if the army or higher institutions were more willing to support presumptive German, Bosnian Muslim, Polish, or Hungarian denunciations, also when it came to false, malicious accusations. And I would like to show an example of the Bosnian case, and it's an order from the army based in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, and it says that already in August it started that the population of the different faiths are accusing each other, and especially accusing official representatives. And it's also said that it's only because of personal revenge, persönliches Rachegefühl. It's written in the middle of the image. Beside police files, which always offer a good view on local conditions, like Wingfield and Healy showed, there is another stock of documents which deals with denunciation. I would say that they are showing the tip of an enormous denunciation iceberg. My dissertation, which was published under the title The Ringstraßenfront, which meant the front at the famous Ringstraße in Vienna, dealt with the state of emergency and the work of the War Surveillance Office, or Kriegsüberwachungsamt. This institution very much influenced the home front because it was, for example, responsible for censorship of letters, media. They detected and countered subversive behavior. They were responsible for prisoners of war and interned. It was called K&K, although it was only 100% responsible for the Austrian half, so half of the Croats, and for some parts of Hungary when they had been part of the mobilized army, and for Bosnia-Herzegovina. Nevertheless, the files of the War Surveillance Office contained examples for denunciation from all over the Habsburg monarchy. Most of the denunciations were not directly sent to the War Surveillance Office, but the most important cases were sent to them because it had been the highest authority. But denunciation became also part of the work of the War Surveillance Office because already interned citizens wrote to it begging for release. Josef Redlich, who is very often cited by historians, alleged that the War Surveillance Office worked in secrecy. But one of the first acts the War Surveillance Office said was an announcement in the public, which was spread in newspapers everywhere in the monarchy and was also stuck on walls. On August 3, 1914, newspapers' headings dealt with the German declaration of war on Russia. The readers were informed that numerous subversive elements are staying in Austro-Hungary. The public was reminded of their patriotic sense of duty to counter this threat. They were asked to send reliable information to the War Surveillance Office. Not only these newspaper announcements, also the numerous letters which were directly addressed to the War Surveillance Office by, for example, Galician peasants, show that its responsibilities had some kind of publicity. So you have here two examples, one from the Neue Freie Presse, and you can see, if you follow the mark, that the population was said that they can write to the Kriegsüberwachungsamt, the War Surveillance Office. Another example from the Reichspost. And here it's a letter of Stefan Zweig. Stefan Zweig directly answered to this announcement and offered his support. And he said that in some districts of Vienna, it could be the word subversive could be misinterpreted, or people do not know, for example, in some workers' districts, what the word subversive means. And it should be maybe replaced by a German word. This example of a poster in 3 languages explained that to give notice of usurious is not malicious denunciation, but a patriotic action. The word denunciation is not a term which I use for a certain behavior. It was used by the denounced as well as the representatives of the state institutions like the War Surveillance Office. Although I found no exact definition, it seems that it was used especially in cases when it came to a malicious accusation which lacked any evidence. I quote, "Denunciation is an act of self-representation," end of quote, wrote Maureen Healy, and highlighted the role of the denouncers, who are, I quote, "socially and politically powerless who find ways to be taken seriously," end of quote. Another historian calls it that they manipulated the system from below for purposes of their own. Therefore, very often, it is not the content of the letter which can be of main interest, but the writer and his or her background. So we do not know if more women denounced or more men, but very many letters had been written anonymous. It seems that the letters do not show mostly the writer's understanding of the state or attitude towards the state, but what they thought the state wants to hear to increase the severity of their information. In a multilingual state as the Habsburg Empire was, also the used language is of importance. Language use was strongly connected to the ethnic belonging, but it was also interesting if someone, for example in Bohemia, decided to denounce in Czech or German. Almost all of the letters which made their way to the war surveillance office are written in German. Seemingly German was the main language of denunciation. But this does not mean that the writers had been Habsburg Germans or even using German as their daily language. I would say that they wrote in German to show the state a special sense of patriotic loyalty. There, for example, from the language frontiers, to use the words of Peter Judson in his book Guardians of the Nation, are of extraordinary interest. Very often the letters are written in a poor language, but this does not mean only that they had not been a native speaker, but also due to a lower social background. Beside the denouncer, the letter's content is of interest. So this, for example, is a letter written in Polish. Very often it becomes clear that the denounced possessed the good which was demanded by the denouncer, independent if that was food or regional national power in a multi-ethnic environment. Very often the denouncer had not been an eyewitness, but referred to man sagt, or it is said, everyone knows. Sometimes the accusation was proved correct, but nevertheless done under malicious motives against a Czech neighbor or a French nun. Therefore, it is not surprising that anonymous letters were signed with a patriot, a worried citizen, veritas, or a German guest. So this Hugo Antonovich is writing that his background is patriotism, and this is signed with veritas. Very often in the end of such letter, the denouncer admitted that although not knowing Czech, he or she is to be sure that these strange-looking people in the coffee house or pub are talking about subversive concerns. When denouncing Habsburg Germans of subversive behavior, very often their relations to enemy aliens are the object of accusation. 2 women in the Styrian town of Leoben were accused of espionage for Russia and Russophilie. The denouncer has observed that they were visited by Russians even before the war. Another question is whether the denunciation was connected to a special incident. Did the malicious accusation against Habsburg Italians and Romanians alter when Italy and Romania entered the war? We should bear in mind that we can only deal with those denunciations preserved in the archives, mostly because they were in a written form. Only in rare cases we know about oral denunciation. For example, when people of the neighborhood denounced others during a police agent was doing his investigation. So may I ask you how many minutes I have left? 5. Perfect. It's of additional importance how state institutions, in this case the War Surveillance Office, reacted on denunciations. So this is the other side of the medal. It is traceable in the central institutions that it trusted Habsburg Germans more than other ethnic groups, when they had been denouncers, as well as when they had been the victims of denunciation. The German School Association, or Deutscher Schulverein, wrote to the War Ministry in Vienna in October 1914. They denounced the mayor's deputy of Schüttenhofen, today Sušice in Czech Republic, to be a Serbophile. They wrote that their information was based only on, I quote, "We have heard it from an always reliable source," end of quote. In this case, although lacking a real source, the War Surveillance Office started an investigation only because the reliable German association had sent the letter. This can be one of the reasons why internists, when begging to be released from prison, argued with a Habsburg German or Austrian background or identity. Marius von Nipoti, for example, who was interned, said about himself, when he was writing, that although being an Italian citizen, he grew up in Austria and was educated by his Habsburg German mom in Graz. He does not even speak fluent Italian, he argued, and therefore he has to be seen as a German. Because of his parents' education, he is Austrian friendly, he wrote, and his natural fatherland is Austria, because he loves it. Marius wrote in his letter about himself in the third person. He was not released. Already in September 1914, Emperor Francis Joseph felt impelled to react on the numerous arrests and detentions of supposed political suspects throughout the empire. He ordered that the state institutions should only react in cases of substantial evidence, I quote, Francis Joseph, because unjustified arrests push even loyal people towards subversive reactions, end of quote. From July-August until September the 9th, in 1914, the Viennese police has reported that already 459 house searches had taken place and 277 arrests. A comparable situation is traceable throughout the empire. The Chief of General Staff, Franz Konrad von Hötzendorf, addressed in autumn 1914 to the Austrian Council of Ministers that in Galicia, numerous political, absolutely reliable and unsuspicious people were taken under arrest, end of quote. He mentioned that the officials had to take care that many accusations were made only by, I quote, political opponents of the Ukraines, and therefore the denunciation was made by Polish nationalists. Although the detectors of subversive elements declared themselves in their anonymous letters very often as loyal, they were not always classified as such by the authorities. Denunciation out of ethnic prejudices was therefore in the Habsburg Empire not only of Germans against other ethnic groups, but at the periphery of the empire of local ethnic groups against each other. This utilization of the state of emergency for own political interests was not exclusively used in Galicia by Poles against Ukraine's Ruthenes or vice versa, but also in Littoral and Dalmatia of Croats against Italians and Italians against Croats, and against Slovens and Trieste, and so on and so on. Denunciation and its effects were also dependent from rating. Sometimes speaking Czech in the public was enough for a denouncer to write a letter in Vienna, and it was also dependent from the respective place where it happened. Maybe in the area of Vienna, where there had been more animosities against Czechs, even before 1914, the situation was more precarious to speak Czech than in Zagreb or in Budapest. To come to an end, it cannot be said how many denunciations were made in the Habsburg Empire during World War I. We are missing evidence to gain statistical data. The War Surveillance Office shows only the tip of an iceberg because it was the highest authority to decide about an accusation. What is certain is that denunciations worsened the living conditions in the home front. The War Surveillance Office files certainly show that the ordinary people had not been the victims of war only, but took actively part in the authoritarian war regimes. Therefore, as Healy and Gellatley already said for other examples, the home front was shaped also by the ordinary people in a negative way, and not only by an authoritarian elite. The ordinary people volunteered in the oppressive regime by using the chance to get rid of personal enemies, disagreeable neighbors, colleagues, and even relatives, in particular when they had another ethnic background. Thank you very much for your attention.